Host, clinical psychologist and emotional well-being researcher guest, author and neuroscience of social masking specialist. What is hidden exhaustion? Host, welcome to the Interior Compass, a space where we take psychology off the therapist's couch and bring it into everyday life. Today we are exploring one of the most underdiagnosed and deeply misunderstood phenomena in modern mental health, hidden exhaustion, not the tiredness you admit to, the kind you bury beneath a smile. Joining me today is someone who has dedicated over 15 years to understanding the neuroscience and psychology of what he calls social masking, the performance of being fine when you are anything but. Welcome to the show, guest. Thank you for having me. And I have to say, even the title of today's episode hit me somewhere in the chest. Smiling through pain. How many of us are doing exactly that right now as we listen, as we go about our day, convinced that no one would understand, or worse, that we don't even deserve to name what we're carrying? Pause, host. That is exactly the question we are here to sit with. And I want to begin with something central to your work, the idea that hidden exhaustion is not a personality trait, it's a survival strategy. Can you unpack that for us? Defining hidden exhaustion, guest. Absolutely. When we use words like hidden exhaustion or smiling through pain, people immediately imagine someone who is simply private or shy about their feelings. But the psychology is far more complex. Hidden exhaustion is the result of sustained emotional labor, the ongoing, often unconscious work of managing your emotional presentation for the benefit of others or for your own social survival. Think about it this way. You wake up in the morning and you feel nothing. Or you feel everything: grief, or numbness, or this low-grade dread you can't quite name. But you have a meeting at 9, you have children to get to school, you have a colleague who will ask, "How are you?" And the only socially acceptable answer, the only safe answer is, "I'm fine, thanks." So you put the mask on, and the mask is convincing. People believe it. They respond to the performance. They don't probe further. And so the mask becomes the only way you know how to move through the world. Host, and over time, what does that cost a person? Guest, the cost is extraordinary, and it is cumulative. What the research shows, backed by neuroimaging studies, is that the act of suppressing authentic emotion activates the same neural pathways associated with physical pain. The prefrontal cortex goes into overdrive trying to regulate and suppress the amygdala's distress signals. You are, quite literally, using enormous cognitive and physiological resources to maintain the performance of being okay. The roots: where does the smiling begin? Childhood origins and conditioning. Host, let's trace this back. Because in clinical work, whenever we sit with someone who is chronically masking, we almost always end up in childhood. How early does this begin? Guest, it begins remarkably early. Children are extraordinarily perceptive social creatures. By age 4 or 5, most children have already begun to map the emotional landscape of their families. They know which emotions are welcome, which are tolerated, and which are dangerous. A child who cries and is told, "Stop that. Be strong. Don't be so sensitive," learns something fundamental. My authentic emotional state is a problem. It disrupts other people. It makes me unlikable, or burdensome, or weak. And so begins the lifelong project of emotional management. Host, and this is particularly pronounced in certain communities and cultures, isn't it? Guest, profoundly so. In many cultures, expressing emotional distress is coded as failure. There are communities where the expectation is, you carry what you carry, and you carry it quietly. You show up, you provide, you smile, you do not burden others with your inner chaos. This is especially prevalent in communities that have survived historical trauma, where emotional stoicism was genuinely necessary for survival. And the tragedy is that the strategy gets passed down, generation to generation, even when the original threat is long gone. The armor remains long after the war. The role of high-functioning anxiety. Host, I want to bring in a term that comes up frequently in this field: high-functioning anxiety, because many of the people who smile the brightest, who appear the most together, are actually running on anxiety as a fuel source. Guest, this is so important and so frequently missed even by clinicians. High-functioning anxiety looks nothing like the anxiety we see in textbooks. It doesn't look like someone frozen in fear, unable to leave their house. It looks like the most organized person in the room. It looks like exceptional performance reviews and immaculate homes and never missing a deadline. The anxiety becomes a driver of hyperproductivity. And the world rewards this. The world says, "Look how capable you are, look how resilient," and the person smiles and says thank you while internally they are sprinting on a treadmill that never stops. terrified that the moment they slow down, everything will fall apart. Or worse, that people will finally see who they really are. Host, the fear of being seen. That is so central to this, isn't it? Guest, absolutely central. And it's a paradox. These individuals are often deeply lonely because they are surrounded by people who know only the mask. They have never been truly known. And yet they cannot take the mask off, because the mask has become so load-bearing that they are not even sure what is underneath it anymore. What hidden exhaustion actually looks like: signs, symptoms, and patterns. Host, let's get concrete. For people listening who are wondering, is this me? What are the signs? What does hidden exhaustion actually look like in daily life? Guest, the signs are often the opposite of what people expect. You might expect someone who is exhausted to look tired, to be underperforming, to be obviously struggling, but hidden exhaustion has a very different signature. The first sign is what we call the collapse pattern. Everything looks fine externally, and then, in a private moment, in the car alone, or in the shower, or at 3 in the morning, the person falls apart completely. They cry without knowing why. They feel an overwhelming heaviness they cannot explain. And then the next morning, they get up and do it all again. The second sign is emotional disconnection. The person begins to feel numb, not sad exactly, but absent. They describe it as feeling like they're watching their own life from behind glass. They can function, they can smile, but they feel fundamentally hollow. Third, physical symptoms. The body always keeps the score. Chronic headaches, jaw tension from clenching, gastrointestinal issues, persistent fatigue that no amount of sleep resolves. The body is carrying what the mind refuses to acknowledge. Host, and the fourth? Guest. The fourth, and perhaps the most heartbreaking, resentment with no clear target. These individuals begin to feel a deep, quiet anger, but because they've spent so long denying their own needs, they can't identify who or what they're angry at. Sometimes they turn it inward. Sometimes it leaks out sideways, a sharp comment, an unexpected irritability, and they feel guilty for it, which reinforces the suppression all over again. Who is most at risk? Host, are there populations that are particularly vulnerable to hidden exhaustion? Guest, yes, several. Caregivers, parents, nurses, therapists, teachers, anyone whose professional or personal role requires them to prioritize others' emotional needs above their own. The helping professions are riddled with hidden exhaustion. People who have experienced childhood emotional neglect, not necessarily abuse, but environments where their feelings were simply not responded to, where they learned that emotions were inconvenient. High achievers and perfectionists, for reasons we've already touched on. And also people from minority or marginalized communities, who may carry the additional labor of code switching and navigating spaces that were not designed for them, often while experiencing chronic stress from discrimination that they feel they cannot afford to visibly react to. Host, the idea of compound exhaustion, multiple layers of masking happening simultaneously. Guest, exactly, and each layer has its own cost. When you are managing your grief and your workplace persona and your racial or gender presentation all at once, the cumulative load is staggering, and yet society often reads this as strength, which makes it even harder to ask for help. The neuroscience, what is happening in the brain. The biology of emotional suppression. Host, I want to go deeper into the neuroscience, because I think understanding what's happening in the brain can be genuinely validating for people. This is not weakness, this is biology. Walk us through what's happening. Guest, when we experience an emotion, let's say grief or fear or deep sadness, the limbic system, particularly the amygdala, fires a signal. This is your body saying, something significant is happening. Pay attention, react. In a healthy emotional processing environment, you would acknowledge that signal, feel the emotion, express it in some form, and integrate the experience. The stress hormones cortisol, adrenaline would release and then return to baseline. But when we suppress that signal, when we smile and push it down, the prefrontal cortex must work overtime to inhibit the amygdala's response. This is cognitively expensive. The cortisol doesn't fully discharge, it lingers, and over time, chronically elevated cortisol has serious consequences. It impairs immune function, disrupts sleep, affects memory consolidation, and can alter the physical structure of the hippocampus, the region associated with emotional regulation and memory. Host, so we are literally rewiring the brain through chronic suppression. Guest, we are. And the science comparing cognitive reappraisal versus expressive suppression consistently shows that people who habitually suppress emotional expression, as opposed to those who process and reframe emotions, show higher physiological arousal, worse memory for emotional events, and report lower levels of positive emotion overall. The mask has a biological price tag, the dopamine trap of performance host. There's also something almost addictive about the performance itself, isn't there? The praise you receive for seeming fine, guessed. Absolutely. This is where the dopamine system gets involved. When we perform being okay, when we show up, handle everything, make it look effortless, and we receive social approval in return. A compliment, an expression of admiration, someone saying, "I don't know how." You do it, that triggers a dopamine reward. And so the brain learns, the performance is rewarded. Authenticity is risky, the mask is safer, and we become, in a sense, addicted to the cycle of performance and approval. Even as the performance is slowly hollowing us out, the social reinforcement keeps us locked inside of it. Relationships and the cost of chronic masking intimacy, connection and loneliness host. Let's talk about what this does to relationships. Many people believe that maintaining the mask protects their relationships. They don't want to burden the people they love, but what's actually happening beneath the surface? Guessed, this is where it gets painful. The mask does protect relationships in the short term. People are not burdened. Conflicts are avoided. The surface remains smooth, but underneath something crucial is being lost. Genuine intimacy. Real intimacy requires being known. It requires allowing another person to see your fear, your confusion, your grief, your need. When the mask is always on, the relationship becomes a performance between two people. And there is a particular loneliness in being surrounded by people who care for you and feeling utterly alone because they are caring for a version of you that doesn't fully exist. Host. I hear this constantly in clinical practice. I have a wonderful partner, wonderful friends, wonderful family, and I am so lonely. And it makes complete sense once you understand the masking. Guessed. Exactly. And the irony is that the vulnerability you are so afraid will push people away is often the very thing that would pull them closer. The willingness to be seen in your imperfection is the foundation of genuine connection. But for someone who has built their entire identity around being the strong one, the capable one, the fine one that feels not just uncomfortable but existentially threatening, the path forward unmasking without unraveling healing and recovery host. So what does healing look like? For someone who has been carrying this perhaps for decades, what is the path forward? Guessed, healing from hidden exhaustion is not about becoming someone who falls apart in public, or who overshares, or who abandons all discretion. It is about developing what we might call selective authenticity, the capacity to choose, from a place of safety and agency, to let the mask down with people who have earned that trust. The first step is recognition. And recognition is harder than it sounds, because people who are chronically masking have often lost touch with what they actually feel. They have suppressed for so long that their emotional signals have become faint. So the work begins with rebuilding interoceptive awareness, noticing what is happening in the body. Where do you carry tension? Where does it hurt? What does your chest feel like at the end of the day? Host. And this is where somatic work can be so valuable. Guessed, hugely valuable, because the emotions that were never expressed verbally are still held in the body. Body-based therapeutic approaches can begin to thaw what has been frozen for years, sometimes decades. The second step is grief, and I mean that literally. To unmask is to grieve all the years of carrying the weight alone, to grieve the version of yourself that never got to be known, to grieve the relationships that might have been deeper if you had allowed them to be. This grief is not collapse, it is integration, practical steps and permission host. For someone listening right now who is recognizing themselves in this conversation, what is one concrete thing they can do today? Guessed. One thing. Give yourself permission to be honest with one person. Not the whole truth, not everything, just a thread of it. Choose one person in your life who you believe is safe, and the next time they ask how you are, resist the automatic, "I'm fine," and say something slightly more true. Actually, it's been a hard week, or even, "I'm carrying a lot right now." Watch what happens. Most of the time, people respond with care, not with the rejection or burden that was feared, and that small moment of being seen, even partially, begins to loosen the architecture of the mask. Host. And for those who feel they have no one to tell, guessed, that is real, and it is a situation that requires professional support, not as a sign of failure, but as a recognition that you deserve someone whose entire role is to hold space for what you are carrying. Therapy is not for broken people. Therapy is for people who have been carrying too much alone for too long, which in this culture is most of us. A message to the one still smiling host. As we close, I want to offer space for a final thought, something to say directly to the person who is listening right now, who has been smiling through pain, who has been performing okay, who is exhausted in ways they have never had the words for. Guest, to that person, I see you, and I want you to know that the strength you have been performing is real, but it has come at a cost that you were never meant to pay alone. You are not too much. You are not a burden. You are someone who learned very early that being a burden was the greatest danger, and you have been protecting the people around you ever since. That is a profound act of love. But love without self-inclusion is not sustainable. You are allowed to put the weight down, not all at once, not forever, but in moments. You are allowed to say, I am not okay. You are allowed to be known. You are allowed to rest not just your body, but the part of you that has been performing since before you can remember. The smile through pain has served you, but you deserve more than survival. You deserve to actually feel the things you have been so carefully hiding. Because on the other side of the mask there is you, and you are worth knowing. Pause, host, thank you. That is a gift to everyone listening today.